Have you ever looked at a seemingly innocent image and felt an inexplicable sense of unease? What if I told you that behind some of the most mundane photos lies a disturbing truth, a story so chilling it defies belief? Today, we begin on a journey through history, uncovering the dark and unsettling backstories behind some of the most obscure images ever captured. We'll explore photos that reveal tragic moments, mysterious disappearances, and unexpected horrors that lurk beneath the surface. Some images may seem harmless at first, but once you know their backstories, you'll never see them the same way again. So, prepare yourself for a journey into some of the worst-kept secrets as we take a look into images with disturbing backstories. What do you see when you look at this image? You might think it's a grainy photograph of a late evening sky between trees, or perhaps even a Rorschach test, the ink blot assessment used for psychological interpretation. The truth, however, is much, much darker. On the afternoon of July 27, 1989, Adam Walsh, a 6-year-old from Indian River County, Florida, United States, was shopping with his mother, Reve Drew Walsh, at a local mall in Hollywood, Florida. They went into Sears, a chain American department store, as Reve wanted to inquire about an item on sale. Adam was left at a kiosk with an Atari 2600 video game console on display, where he and other kids were taking turns playing with the console. Reve finished her shopping not long after, at around 12:15 p.m., and returned to find that Adam, as well as the other boys, had disappeared. A store manager informed her that the kids had argued over whose turn it was for the console, resulting in a security guard instructing the boys to leave the store. The security guard had asked the older boys if their parents were in the store, and they said that they weren't. Adam said nothing, with the officer assuming he was friends with the older boys, leaving Adam to join them outside. Reve, now beginning to worry, would page Adam and continue to look for him throughout the store, but she simply couldn't find him. After more than 90 minutes of searching, and her attempts at paging failed to locate Adam, Reve called the Hollywood police at 1:55 p.m. After some investigating, local police concluded that Adam was abducted by Otis Toole, an American serial killer who lured Adam into his 1971 Cadillac sedan with promises of toys and candy. He then proceeded to drive north on Interstate 95 towards his home in Jacksonville, Florida. Adam, now realizing the mistake he had made, began to panic as Otis drove further away. In an attempt to stop Adam's frantic behavior, Otis would then knock Adam out unconscious as he drove further away to a deserted service road in northwest St. Lucie County. Upon arriving, he realized Adam was still breathing. He then took Adam's life via suffocation, dragged him out of his car, and decapitated him with a machete. He then threw Adam's head onto the rear floorboard of the car before disposing of the body. On August 10th, exactly 2 weeks after Adam's disappearance, a severed head would be found in a drainage canal near Vero Beach, about 210 kilometers or 130 miles from where he was originally abducted. Adam's mother and the rest of his family would continue their search efforts to try and find Adam and return him home, still believing that Adam was somewhere out there, alive. These remains, however, would soon after be identified as Adam's. The coroner ruled the cause of Adam's death was asphyxiation, suggesting that Adam's life had been taken away several days before the discovery of his remains. The rest of his body, unfortunately, was never recovered. The head itself would be kept in the morgue until the case's closure in 2008. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're wondering, what does the image shown at the beginning have to do with all of this? Well, Joe Matthews, a former Miami Beach homicide detective, published a book titled Bringing Adam Home in 2001. In this book, Joe details evidence that was either discovered by himself or was overlooked by the police department or never considered. One such piece of evidence was this image, and this image shows the carpet inside of the rear floorboard of the car. And if you look close enough, you can almost see a face. Can't see it? What about now? This image was one of 98 photos taken by Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigators of Otis's Cadillac. The fluorescent pale blue color you see is luminol, a water-based agent capable of detecting blood that has been diluted up to 10,000 times. At the time of this atrocity, DNA technology didn't exist to determine if the blood found on the rear floorboard of his car matched Adam's. The technology now exists, but the carpet was somehow misplaced while in the custody of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Investigators also somehow managed to neglect to lift blood from the machete when discovered. So annoyingly, although we can definitely confirm that this image does show blood across the carpet floorboard and an imprint of what appears to be a face, we'll never be able to truly confirm it was in fact Adam. Otis had twice confessed to taking the life of Adam, but later recanted these statements. He had claimed responsibilities for hundreds of attacks, but police believed most of his confessions were simply untrue. It wasn't until on his deathbed in prison that he confessed to his niece that he did in fact take the life of Adam Walsh. Otis died in prison of cirrhosis in 1996 at the age of 49. He was serving 5 life sentences for killings unrelated to Adam's death. Police announced on December 16, 2008, that Adam's case was closed, stating they were satisfied that Otis was in fact the killer. The only remains of Adam, his head, were stored in a morgue as part of the evidence throughout the ongoing investigation, but were returned to his family following the closure of the case, so that they could finally give Adam a proper burial. The kidnapping and death of Adam Walsh is incredibly sad, with the parents understandably frustrated and disappointed by the police department's handling of the case. Firstly, they argue the cops didn't take the missing persons case seriously enough, and once it turned into a potential killing investigation, they somehow misplaced crucial pieces of evidence that could have confirmed that this was in fact Adam's blood. Otis's decisions to confess, then later recant his confession, did nothing to help the investigation. But with the case now closed, we can only hope that Adam's parents can find some form of closure from such an awful tragedy. You might have come across this next image either through school, a newspaper, or by simply browsing the internet. The photograph depicts a mother, Lucille Chalifou, hiding her head, as her 4 children sit huddled and confused beneath a sign that reads, "4 children for sale. Inquire within." First published on August 5, 1948, by the Vidette Messenger of Valparaiso, Indiana, the image was accompanied by a caption stating, "A big for sale sign in a Chicago yard mutely tells the tragic story of Mr. and Mrs. Ray Chalifou, who face eviction from their apartment. With no place to turn, the jobless coal truck driver and his wife decide to sell their 4 children. Mrs. Lucille Chalifou turns her head from the camera above while her children stare wonderingly. On the top step are Lana, 6, and Ray, 5. Below are Milton, 4, and Sue Ellen, 2. The legitimacy of the image was questioned, including by family members of the Chalifou family. However, the story behind it is completely true. The image was later republished in papers all over the country, and a few days later, the Chicago Heights Star reported families opening their homes to the children, with job offers and offers of financial support making their way to the family. Unfortunately, none of this seemed to be enough. All of the children in the photo, including the child Lucille was pregnant with at the time, were sold. But the question remains, What happened to these children? The youngest of the children for sale, David, with whom Lucille was pregnant with when the photo was taken, was legally adopted by Harry and Luella McDaniel, who had official custody of him in July of 1950. David's life was an improvement to his previous home, being described as more stable and safer, yet much stricter. He described himself as a rebellious teen, eventually running away from home at the age of 16, before spending the next 20 years of his life serving in the military. Following his service, David continued working as a truck driver. Rayanne, unfortunately, had a much worse upbringing. She claimed that her mother sold her for $2 so that she could have bingo money. This money was given to Lucille by John and Ruth Zoetterman, the adoptees. They had originally only planned to purchase Rayanne, but noticed Milton crying nearby and decided to take him too. The family would later change Rayanne's name to Beverly and Milton's name to Kenneth. Upon arriving home, they soon realized that they had unfortunately been purchased by horrible people. Rayanne stated, "They used to chain us up all the time. When I was a little child, we were field workers." Milton, who faced beatings, starvation, and abuse, began to become increasingly violent as he grew older, with a judge deeming him to be a menace to society, forcing him to spend a number of years in a mental hospital. Rayanne too faced issues, claiming that in her late teens she was kidnapped, R-worded, and got pregnant. She was then sent to Michigan to a home for unwed mothers, and following the birth of the child, returned to her hometown, with the baby being taken from her and later adopted. At the age of 17, she left her adopted home and never looked back. Milton and Rayanne would later connect as adults. Unfortunately, their sister Lana passed away in 1998 due to cancer, so they never saw her again. They were, however, able to reconnect with Sue after discovering she grew up not too far from their original home. By the time the siblings were reconnected in 2013, Sue was unfortunately suffering from late stages of lung disease and found it difficult to speak. It really is a tragic story, but it gets even sadder when it was discovered that Lucille would later on remarry, have 4 more children, and would keep them. The reasoning for this is, unfortunately, unknown. She never truly apologized to her children that she had sold and passed away on the 1st of May, 1992, aged 68. The children, now much older and reflecting on their mother's decision to sell them, have mixed feelings about her decision to do so. Rayanne, who was sold for $2 for bingo money, claimed their lives were simply tragic for some years after being sold. David, who hadn't even been born during the photo, harbours the least resentment, saying, "She never apologised. Back then, it was survival. Who are we to judge? We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. She could have been thinking about the children, didn't want them to die." Sue, on the other hand, thought differently, simply stating, "She needs to be in hell burning." This image is a historically depressing one, as it shows how desperate some families were during the 1940s. 1945 marked the end of World War II, with some families taking years to recover from the effects of war, and this family was unfortunately just one example. Her decision to sell her children, although incredibly unfortunate, could have, and I do say this lightly, been done for the benefit of her children. But this wasn't the case. Her receiving job offers and financial support from people around the States fell flat, and her decision to sell one of her children for bingo money is just callous. I'm really glad some of her children have been able to reconnect, but I do feel sorry for Lana, who, in the end, was never able to reconnect with her siblings, and passed never finding out what truly happened to them. Our next image shows a woman crouching on the moors, holding her pet dog closely. At first glance, it appears to be just a casual photograph. Maybe she's resting during a hike or marking a spot of interest. But where was this image taken, and what significance does this location hold? This seemingly ordinary picture was taken on the Saddleworth Moors in England, a place known for its desolate beauty and stark landscapes. The woman in the image is Myra Hindley, a name that might not ring any bells immediately, but one that is tied to a much darker chapter in history. So, what is the real story behind this image? Myra Hindley was born on July 23, 1942, in Crumpsall, a suburb of Manchester. Her early life was marked by a troubled childhood, with a strict and sometimes abusive father. She was known to be a bright student, but her life took a dark turn when she met Ian Brady in 1961. Hindley was instantly drawn by Brady's charisma and his radical antisocial ideas. Ian Brady, originally named Ian Duncan Stewart, was born on January 2, 1938 in Glasgow. He also had a difficult upbringing, surrounded by poverty and instability. His fascination with Nazi ideology and sadistic literature made him the monster he grew up to be. When Brady moved to Manchester in the late 1950s, his path eventually crossed with Hindley's, and together, they became a deadly duo. The pair worked together at Millwoods Merchandising, where their relationship quickly escalated from casual colleagues to something far more sinister. Brady introduced Hindley to his twisted worldview, and she, falling in love with Brady, soon adopted his way of thinking. They began to plan and execute a series of perfect kidnappings and murders that would shock the nation. They targeted vulnerable young victims, often children, whom they would lure with promises of rides or help with chores. Hindley would often act as the bait to gain the trust of their unsuspecting victims, and Brady would then overpower the victims, leading them to isolated locations on the moors where they were subjected to unimaginable horrors. The attacks took place between July 1963 and October 1965, with the victims ranging in age from 10 to 17. Each crime was marked by brutality, with Brady and Hindley photographing their victims and recording their final moments of terror. Their reign of terror continued for 2 years until they were finally apprehended in 1965. The capture came after David Smith, Hindley's brother-in-law, witnessed Brady attacking a young man named Edward Evans. Horrified, Smith reported the incident to the police, leading to the arrest of Brady and Hindley. These two individuals, with their dark pasts and even darker deeds, became the faces of evil in the United Kingdom. Their crimes forever marked British history, now remembered as the Moors murders. So, what significance does this image have? Initially, the images appeared to be simple snapshots taken during a day out. However, the true significance became apparent when the police compared the photos with the landscape. They realized that these were not just random locations, but specific spots where the victims were buried. And in this particular image, she's crouching and staring directly down to the ground at one of her victims. The discovery of these burial sites was both a breakthrough and a tragedy. On October 10th, 1965, the police found the body of John Kilbride buried in a shallow grave, right where Hindley was crouching in that photograph. Following this discovery, the police continued their search and, in July 1987, found the body of Pauline Reed. This was over 2 decades after her murder, and the identification of her remains was made possible by the detailed analysis of the photographs taken by Hindley. A 14-day trial began on April 19, 1966. As the death penalty for murder had been abolished 6 months earlier, the judge passed the only sentence the law now allowed: life imprisonment. Brady was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, and Hindley was given 2. In 1989, Brady also confessed to taking the lives of 2 other people, but was never tried for his crimes. He passed away in 2017, aged 79. Hindley, now referred to as the most evil woman in Britain, passed away in prison in 2002, at the age of 60. The Moores murders are an awful story, but even so many years after the attacks, Brady and Hindley both refused and ignored any appeals by police and family members of victim Keith Bennett to find out where his body had been buried, and unfortunately, finding a body without any information is near impossible. John Ainley, the solicitor of Winnie Johnson, Bennett's mother, stated, "I live on the edge of Saddleworth Moor, and unless you have definite information, it is a needle in a haystack." The bodies of their victims, Pauline Reed, 16, John Kilbride, 12, Leslie Ann Downey, 10, and Edward Evans, 17, were found. However, they weren't able to locate Keith Bennett's body. Winnie Johnson, Keith's mother, passed away in August of 2012, never finding out where her son had been buried, and never being given the closure she deserved. To this day, his body has never been found. Our final image goes into the story of John Edward Robinson, a seemingly innocent man who is anything but. Seen wearing a yellow sweater in this image and holding a baby, this might seem like a heartwarming family photo at first. But the truth behind the photo is nothing short of horrific. John Edward Robinson was born on December 27, 1943, in Cicero, Illinois. Early on, he showed signs of trouble, frequently getting into legal issues. Despite these early red flags, he managed to present himself as an ordinary guy, which later helped him commit some truly horrific crimes. In the 1980s, Robinson's criminal activities took off. He got involved in various scams, including embezzlement and forgery, posing as a successful businessman. This charm and deceit allowed him to manipulate those around him, hiding his darker side. By the late 1980s, his crimes took a more sinister turn. Robinson started targeting vulnerable women, offering them jobs or financial help. Once he gained their trust, he would exploit and then dispose of them, creating a web of lies to cover up their disappearances. His ability to blend in and his careful planning made him a particularly dangerous predator. One of his most infamous crimes involved Lisa Stasi, a young woman going through tough times. Lisa Stasi was a young mother struggling to find stability. At just 19 years old, she had a baby daughter, Tiffany, and was trying to make a fresh start after leaving a troubled marriage. Desperate for help, she crossed paths with John Edward Robinson in early 1985. He promised her a job, an apartment, and a new beginning, exactly what Lisa needed to get back on her feet. She was hopeful and trusted Robinson, unaware of the danger she was stepping into. On January 8, 1985, Lisa and Tiffany checked into a motel room in Overland Park, Kansas, arranged by Robinson. He told Lisa that the job and apartment would be finalized the next day. That night, Lisa called her family, excited about the new opportunities. Sadly, this would be the last time they ever heard from her. The next day, Robinson lured Lisa to a different location under the pretense of signing paperwork for her new job. Once there, he convinced her to sign several blank sheets of paper. These sheets would later become forged letters, falsely claiming that Lisa had decided to leave Tiffany in Robinson's care and disappear. After obtaining her signature, Robinson took her life. The exact details of her death remain unclear, but it's believed that he strangled her. Robinson then disposed of Lisa's body, which has never been found. Here, the story takes another darker turn. A few days later, Robinson contacted his brother and sister-in-law, who were wanting a child but were unable to adopt a baby through traditional means. Robinson contacted them, informing them that he knew of a baby whose mother had taken her own life. He told them for a price of $5,500 in legal fees, they could have the baby, using Lisa's signature and a set of authentic appearing adoption papers with 2 forged signatures of 2 lawyers and a judge. they believed him. Robinson's brother and sister-in-law adopted Tiffany, renaming her Heather. They had no idea about the dark truth behind her arrival. They raised Heather with love and care, never suspecting the horrific events that had led her to them. This image you see, of Robinson holding Tiffany, surrounded by his family with everyone smiling, was taken mere days after Robinson had brutally taken the life of Lisa Stasi and separated Tiffany from her mother. It's incredibly shocking to just see the smile across his face, knowing fully well what he did to Lisa and Tiffany just days before. As Heather grew up, she lived a normal life with her adoptive family. They provided her with all the love she needed, completely unaware they were raising the daughter of someone Robinson had attacked. The truth of her real identity would come much later, turning their world upside down. In the year 2000, at the age of 15 years old, Heather would learn that the man she grew up to know as her uncle was actually a serial killer who had taken the lives of countless women, including her own biological mother. In 2002, Robinson stood trial in Kansas for multiple deaths and was convicted on all counts. Robinson received the death penalty for 2 of the attacks and life imprisonment for the death of Lisa Stasi. He currently remains on death row at the El Dorado Corrections Facility in Kansas. It's an incredibly twisted story, and what makes it even more disturbing is that Robinson believed taking the life of an innocent woman just to give the baby to his brother and sister-in-law was somehow justifiable. In the end, he not only destroyed their lives, but the lives of others Robinson had taken, as well as the families and friends of those who knew them. I'm glad Heather managed to find some form of closure in the end, as she now knows the truth behind who her biological mother is. But it is such a tragedy what became of her through the actions of an evil and twisted man.